We are back, very excited for our conversation this week on the Limitless Leadership Lounge. I'm John Gehring. This is a tri-generational conversation for emerging leaders. Why do we call it that? Because I'm joined by Dr. Anuma Kareem and Coach Jim Johnson as well. And we also have two other special guests here that Coach has brought along. So, Coach, without further ado, go ahead and introduce our guests.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I read their book that they did together called The Score That Matters. It's an outstanding read. And so I want to share a little bit of bio. Actually, I'll start with Ryan Hawk. Ryan is actually this second time he's been on our podcast, so it's a privilege to have him on for a second time. We've only had a couple of people that have done that. And Ryan is the creator and the host of the Learning Leader Show, a show that I listen to all the time. He regularly delivers keynote speeches for Fortune 500 companies. He also runs a leadership circle. Ryan has built an online leadership school called the Learning Leader Academy. He's the author of Welcome to Management and the Pursuit of Excellence, which I've read both those books, both great. And of course, the latest book that he wrote with our other guest, Brook, called The Score That Matters. And Ryan also is married and has 5 daughters. So it's good to have Ryan. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Coach. It's good to be with you again.
Thank you. And Brook Cupps, I've had a chance to talk to Brook on the phone, and I admire his work. And Brook has been a high school basketball coach for more than 20 years, earning several Coach of the Year awards. His teams have won numerous conference, district, and regional championships, as well as Centerville High School's first ever basketball state championship in 2021, which his son played on. So it had to be quite a thing. Brook, I know, has a great blog that I read often. He publishes it weekly, and his coaching, his site is called The Blue Collar Grit, and he's also the author of Surrender the Outcome. Brook, we're really excited to have you on the Limitless Leadership Lounge as well.
I appreciate it, Coach. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's begin. This is a question I'm going to ask both of you. I'm going to start with Brook, and then Ryan, I'd like you to share your thoughts on this as well. So, a lot of, in young leaders, we're talking about how do you build team culture? And, we could delve into that for hours, but I'd like to, Brook, I'll start with you. What is an activity that you'll do with your team that you've thought has been helpful in building team culture? I know you shared some of those in the book, but is there one in particular? And Ryan, what are you saying? Because I know you work with a lot of leaders, an activity that you do that you found has been very effective in helping leaders build team culture. So, Brooke, starting with you, your thoughts.
Oh, well, I mean, I think the first thing you have to do is you got to figure out what the behaviors you want your culture to represent are. Culture is nothing more than behaviors. It's the daily actions of the people on your team. And so when you work backwards from that, you can kind of reverse engineer activities that represent those values and those cultures. So for us, thankful is one of our 4 core values. So an exercise that we do every year is called Your 68. We actually do it with some groups Ryan and I have worked with. But we take a basketball, and it's named after Jaromir Jagr, who a great hockey player, wore number 68. And a lot of people don't know he wore 68 for his grandpa, who died in the Battle of 1968. And so all we do is we take the basketball, we pass it around, and everybody writes on the ball somebody that they want to honor with the way that they go about their business, the way they go about playing the game. Not if they average 20 points or no, just how they do it, how they go about living, interacting with their teammates, on the team, out of the team, in practice, out of practice. So we pass that around. Everybody writes the name of that person on the ball, and it shares a little story about why they picked them. And then that's kind of the thing that goes with us everywhere to all of our games. So our Your 68 ball is it's kind of the premier piece of our program. We don't really select captains, but at the end of the year, that goes to our guy at the end of the year that gets named our leadership award. That's what he receives. So
wow, very cool. Right?
I feel like culture is a lot to do with trust. And so Brooke and I have talked a lot about this, how you can do this both in sports and in the corporate world. Laugh together, cry together, and do hard things together. So I think it's always about thinking of activities that create some sort of vulnerability, which is a combination of a few of those things. Sometimes vulnerability is funny. Sometimes it's hard. And I think doing that together. So any type of activities, like Brook's really big on improv exercises. So you can do those with your teams. There are certainly people on a part of every team that will find those exercises uncomfortable, but then pushing past them will probably create some laughter, as well as doing hard things together, and that can develop trust. And I think those types of exercises can help bring people together. We do them every year at our Learning Leader Growth Summit, and that's a collection of people. Some of them know each other, some of them don't. But it's always a big hit, I think, when you do those types of improv exercises together, because you learn a bit about people's personalities. You see them get way outside of their normal comfort zone. Sometimes it's really impressive to see the skills and the I think humor and acting ability that comes from that. And so I'd say that's one example that I've learned from Brook that initially I was probably not like a huge fan of, as someone who's a bit more introverted and doesn't want to do those types of things. But then you do them with a group of people and you see them like, oh, okay, like it's okay to kind of let your guard down. It's okay to share. It's okay to laugh together. And it's okay sometimes to cry together, and it's okay to do hard things together. That's how I think culture can be built.
Mm. And Brooke and Ryan, your book, The Score That Matters, it resonated with me so much at so many different levels. So thank you so much for writing this book. So before I ask my question, I just want to let you know that the areas that you were talking about, the inner score, the outer scores, and in this world, we are so much fascinated with the outer score, the title, and all those elements. And for me, growing up in a different culture, in a Muslim Bangladeshi culture, I was expected to be that good girl who is staying home by age of 21, 22, get married, have kids by 25. So there were like rules, that boxes that we have to tick. And being me, I just I did not meet any of those criterias. So I was a rebel playing all these hockey and football with guys outside, and then not getting married, instead going for study abroad and all those kind of stuff. And then instead of being cushioned in a good tenure track faculty position, I decided to leave and start my own nonprofit in unpredictability and all those kind of stuff. So for me, I was interested, what made you write this book, both of you, and the title you gave? What are the thought process, and why, and how did you collaborate to come into writing this book?
You want me to go?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, it started, I guess I should take it back to our first interactions, which were years ago, maybe 2016, 2017. Brooke sent me an email, asked me to come speak to a group at Centerville High School, a leadership group that he was running. I was not fully aware of like the impact that he had already brought to Centerville High School, both with the basketball team and beyond in his leadership class, and with the leaders of sports teams and other groups at Centerville High School. I came away just very impressed and learned a lot about what it means to be tough, passionate, unified, and thankful. Those are Brooke's 4 core values, as well as the behaviors to go with them. And I, quite frankly, wanted to personally live more according to a set of values that didn't really exist, or at least I hadn't defined them. So it started out of me, I think, wanting to live a life that's more on purpose, with more intention. And I'd gotten a little bit down that path with my podcast and learning from the guests, but it became even more so when I met Brooke and realized, oh, this dude has figured out kind of how to define success on his own terms, how to not need the approval of external people, how to really identify his foxhole and have those people in his life. And like, that's what it's all about. So to me, it was really an aspirational thing. Once I learned more, and the Score That Matters came out of that, really, I think it comes from like 2 different perspectives. You have 1, a mentor / teacher, and 2, a student. And so you get the perspective of both, Brooke being the teacher, me being the student, of you kind of get a feel of what it's like to be in both people's shoes, of how to live more intentionally and on purpose and by a code, a set of values. And that's really where, at least from my perspective, where it came from me. And certainly deciding to sign up and have a project that lasts years with a mentor of yours is a really a good thing for the mentee, because you're going to learn the whole way, and certainly the writing process too forces you to learn, because you got to get the thoughts out of your head onto the page. So I'd say that's like the beginnings of it, of how it all got started, and I'm obviously very grateful for how that came about.
Great. Brooke.
For me, it was, I mean, Ryan talks about like me being his mentor. That's a pretty, I mean, I would say it's a relationship that's beneficial to both of us. It's definitely not like I'm ahead of him. There are things that I've done for longer, just because I was forced to. And so the score that matters really is for me. It's about the journey from me coaching transactionally to start with, and transitioning to being transformational with how I approach coaching. And I had made that switch several years before, had kind of dove into trying to help other people learn it. And then, Ryan, I just kind of cold emailed Ryan. I didn't know him. I didn't know if he'd even replied to it. I knew his podcast, and obviously I'd listened to that and knew all the people that he had talked about. But then, once we got together and started talking, it became more of like, I mean, for me, writing's a challenge. Like it's like doing hard
Mm.
things. Like that's what it
Right.
is. It's a different way of running a marathon or something like that. And so, being able to do a hard thing with somebody. By that time, Ryan and I, like we were friends. And so now I was doing it with somebody that I cared about and trusted. And so it was very much a trust building thing where we got to spend, I mean, several years just hacking away at this thing that, we didn't really know what it was at first. And then it started kind of taking shape. And then it was like, oh man, I think this might be good. I think we could help people. And then, so that part of it was really cool. So for me, it was
Mm.
more about that struggle and challenge, and then the opportunity to hopefully share a message that we thought could be impactful.
Beautiful.
So let's dive into the book. A lot of really important things to cover here, but one of them that jumped out to me was your discussion on fear and the importance of the opportunity to actually use fear as fuel, as you say. Let's start with Brooke this time. What inspired that, and what do you mean? How can we use fear as fuel?
Well, I mean, one of the things we do in my leadership class is we ask about what's holding you back. And one of the most common answers is a fear of failure. Comparison is one, fear of failure is two. Every year, same thing all the time. And so it just makes you think about like, what are we really afraid of? And makes you have to think about it. And when you slow down and you help people reflect on the things that they're afraid of, they see that a lot of times they're afraid of things that don't even happen. If you can get them to stop, reflect, and take that space. And so for me, that's what it is. I mean, almost all of our fears are unfounded. We make them up. And this ties very closely to me to stories we tell ourselves. Like that story in your head that you immediately go to prior to acting, that you think something happens and then you act, but really something happens and then you tell your story about that thing that happened, and snowball all these different things, and then you act on that story. And so trying to help people and give them the agency to take control of their story, and then I think that addresses a lot of those fears that they might have.
Well said. How about you, Ryan? What do you think? How can we use fear as fuel?
I mean, I learned a lot through, actually, I remember writing this chapter from Brooke, because fear has been a motivator of mine, of like being afraid of letting my teammates down. And I first remember it when my high school coach, Bob Gregg, came to me as a freshman in high school and said, you're gonna be the starting quarterback. And I'm 14 years old playing with grown men, 18-year-old men, and just being very fearful of letting them down. And so that, I would say that led to like a version of Jim Collins' productive paranoia for me, to say, well, I'm going to use some of that fear as fuel to be overly prepared, to get my body as in shape as it could possibly be to withstand the hits and what happens over the course of playing a football season with grown men when I'm still a kid. And so in a way, and I cite Cody Keenan, who's a speechwriter years ago for President Obama, and how he used some of that fear in order to write better speeches to make them sing, as he said. So I think there's a couple ways to look at it, and we could probably talk for an hour about this topic alone. But in a way, like that's one area that I would say some of that fear still exists for me, and then I try to use that in the form of this productive paranoia to. I'm a bit worried about like big events. And so the best medicine for that fear for me is just to be overly prepared. And Brooke and I have talked a lot about the fact that if you're not like, I mean, I think we have some skills and some talent, but if you're not overly like world-class talent, you have to make up for it in other ways. And the other ways that we can make up for it is by working incredibly hard each day to be overly prepared for whatever the big moments that we have. And so that's another angle of how I've used fear as a fuel to be ready for big moments.
If I could add to that real quick, I think that if you think about what most people are afraid of, it's other people's opinions. Like that's usually what we're afraid of. And so Ryan's focus on his work just shifts it shifts his focus off of what other people think to being overly prepared. If he's overly prepared, it's whatever. It's going to be as good as it can be. So that addresses that. That kind of uses fear as the positive fuel.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I actually have two slightly different questions. So I'm going to start with you, Brooke. Obviously being a basketball coach for many decades myself, and something when I mentor young coaches, I talk more about trying to build a culture and getting clarity of the mission of the program and all those types of things over X's and O's. Although I will say when I started as a coach, my big thing was trying to learn, more or better plays, how to teach a skill better. So I'm curious, you took over a program that was just okay, and you've built it into a really great program, winning a state championship a couple of years ago. Tell us, what advice would you give to a young leader taking over a situation like you did to help them get off to a faster start than, for example, me, where I got fired from my first varsity job?
I mean, the program I took over was in pretty good shape. I mean, it was a successful program. The foundation of work had been established, and I would just say, I think the most important thing when you take over a program or when you're coaching or leading is knowing who you are and trusting and believing in that. You won't hold people accountable. You won't have the standards at the level they need to be at if it's not a reflection of who you are, and you don't have a very clear picture of that and are able to communicate that. So I think that's really important. Having clarity on who you are, clarity on where you want to go. Where, like I remember saying at the very first meeting, like at Centerville, that they had never won a regional championship. So they'd never been out of the regionals. For us, that's like to the round of like Elite Eight, right? And so like I said, like we're going to win a state championship. That's what we're doing. If you're playing high school basketball in Ohio, then of course that's what you're trying to do. I don't understand trying to do anything else. But then I think the other part of it is just having unrelenting high standards. I think we are quick to lower standards to appease people now, and we just don't lower the standard.
Yeah.
Point.
And it's
Actually,
yeah, go ahead,
I'm
Coach.
sorry, I apologize. I just want to, Ryan, just slightly different because I know you have an awesome podcast that I listen to regularly, and I'm curious, of all the great business leaders you've interviewed, can you distill down to a couple things that you could help a young leader that's taking over a business or starting a business to help them get off to a better start?
For the first, I actually think of a person. Kat Cole shared for me like the definition of a productive achiever, and I think I try to. This is again aspirational for me, but on one side, these people have a great level of courage and confidence. Confidence is built through evidence of doing hard things. Courage is being willing to like believe in something and have a code set of values. I think the courage to live up and live out the behaviors theirs. But on the other side, they're also quite curious and humble. And so this, like think of a weighted balance that you have to have both equally balanced of a person who has high levels of courage and confidence mixed with high levels of curiosity and humility. You have the curiosity to ask questions, to seek better answers, to learn all the time, never stop. And the humility to say, well, I need other people. Like, I need you. We're going to do this as a team. We're going to do this together. And I think if that is just a really good combination of a person, and it's again the one that I probably strive hard to really create evidence for myself, which then leads to confidence that I can do hard things regularly, to stand up for what I believe in, to have that courage, but also to always be seeking knowledge, to be asking questions, to be curious. That's one of my core values as well. And to be humble, to say, well, I'll be a lot better off if I can surround myself with a really quality team of people that are all, we have complementary skills and that I look up to them. There's like a mutual admiration society. So I think as I'm trying to like grow a business and keep going with what I'm doing, we have to, I just need to be surrounded by people, I think, that are lifting me up while I'm trying to lift them up too. And if you can do that, then I think you got a shot to do something special and to help a lot of people.
And there is that saying that you are the five people you hang out with. So who are those five people who lifts you up? And also like checks you, like when you are doing something wrong or something like that. And also, Brooke, thank you so much for bringing out that idea of not following through, like the fear of what other people's are thinking. And I found out that once you stop caring about being fearful of what other people think, it is so freeing. Like you feel that sense of freedom to be who you are. Coming back to your book, The Inner Score, I'm just curious what you both think about. How do you think that keeping that inner score, and if you just give an idea what the inner scores are, what are the outer scores and what are the inner scores, and how can you enrich your life by keeping track of that inner scores? So if you could explain and shed a little bit light on that.
Ryan, why don't you go first this time?
Oh, okay. So the external scoreboard is very easy to get caught up in that. It's comparing yourself to other people, right? Social media makes this very easy to do. A lot of people fall victim to this. I certainly do. And so it's if you're not doing the work on yourself to clearly identify what success is to you, you will default to just following whatever you see out there. And so I think the biggest difference between people who live by an inner scoreboard versus the outer scoreboard is that they've done the work on themselves to know themselves, and this is a never-ending process, and clearly define what success is for them, not what success is deemed by society's terms, whether that's titles or money or wins or whatever that may be. And I think of it too. It's like this is also how you eliminate envy. Envy is a very powerful thing out in the world, and people who I've found, and when I'm envious of others and envious of things, it's because I haven't been doing the work on myself to clearly define what do I value, what are the critical behaviors that align with my core values. And at the end of the day, I need to ask myself those questions. Did I live out being a thoughtful, thankful, curious, and consistent person? And the behaviors to match those. If I'm doing that, I don't really even have time to be comparing myself to other people. I'm thinking about me living out those values each day. And when I do that, like things seem to go well. Like cool opportunities come about. Great companies seem to want to work with us. Great podcast guests seem to want to talk. good things just seem to happen more so than if I'm looking too externally for the success that society has said is what it is. So that's been the neat thing as I've evolved and learned how to do this. And again, it's a never ending process. It's still aspirational, but it feels like the coolest things and the people that I want to work with, both as teammates as well as clients, have come about more so when I focus much more on the internal scoreboard versus the external one.
So true. Brooke, please.
No, that was really well said. I think the only thing I would add is I think the internal scoreboard is fixed. Like you define it and it doesn't move. I think the external scoreboard is a constant race. We have a quote in our book. One of the chapters is like, I don't remember it exactly, but missing a train is only painful if you chase it. Right. And so like that to me is like very true. Like that's exactly right. Like, like not being the CEO is only painful if you think you need to be the CEO. Like it's not. If you can
Oh,
release
so
yourself
true.
from that, it's very empowering.
Right? The external expectations that we often put on ourselves, that these are the things you will be only happy if you go through those things. And Ryan, I was looking into one of your podcasts, and you talked about a guy with a flashy Corvette in the car park. So it's interesting. Like there are people around us who will try to show their flashy Corvette or those cars to get that, like I am important, to feel that importance. So
Yeah.
it's interesting that the book
Yeah. I mean,
talks
that's
about.
that we are constantly surrounded by that. That's why I asked the question though. Like, I'm okay if you're a car guy, maybe like that's your thing.
Mhm.
Great. But is evident in this story. It was, I need to show others that I am successful. And this is one way of me trying to do that. And so it was kind of a weird moment. I vividly remember that time with a few of my buddies, like, oh, yeah, okay, cool car guy. Like, okay, as opposed to saying like, yeah, maybe I grew up with a mom and a dad and we worked on cars for a living or something like that. So I think it's just, it was evident that in that particular example, and that was an example that I'm sure lots of people have experienced, is that like, hey, let's clearly define what success is for us as opposed to trying to peacock or show for others that I'm a success now that I happen to get promoted.
Right.
This really resonates because we've been talking a lot recently on the podcast about results-based goals versus progress-based goals and changing the KPIs, right? The key performance indicators of are we looking for that final overall result goal, that income, that special relationship we want, whatever, or are we looking towards the progress to getting those results that we ultimately desire? So again, the score that matters. You got to get this link down in the show notes. Ryan and Brooke put together a really, really great book, and one of the things you discussed too is your emotional thermostat. This is an interesting concept to me because we've heard the concept before, but you guys, both faced some really difficult obstacles. One of them, Ryan, I know right off the bat, just knowing your story a little bit, you could argue that Ben Roethlisberger was an obstacle for you, right? So there are certainly some things in Brooke in your career and life as well. So talk a little bit about those obstacles and how they informed this particular thought about the emotional thermostat that you discuss in the book.
I think we're all defined by how we handle adversity and challenge. And so your ability to keep your emotions in check and then respond based on who you are, not based necessarily on specifically how you're feeling in the moment, is a huge indicator of your ability, like how successful you're going to be able to be. I always go back to the stories. It relates to the story you tell yourself. If Ryan had a different story when Ben Roethlisberger, was there as the quarterback, then he probably doesn't go to OU and be as successful as he is. He wallows in self-pity forever and, just, complains and blames it on other people. I just think our ability to maintain that steadiness is a reflection of how secure we are with and clear on who we are, and then the stories that we intentionally tell ourselves about the situations that we're in, the circumstances that we're in. Like anytime we're in we're trying to blame somebody else, we're just like any argument like that's like it's a race to the blame game, like who can become the victim first. And sometimes we have that conversation with ourselves, trying to make ourselves the victim. So erasing that, I think, is a big part of that emotional thermostat.
Taking ownership. I mean, this is the biggest thing I feel like as a dad that is a conversation. And some of it just takes life reps, but because I'm sure I know when I was even in college and losing that quarterback job that I didn't handle it great. But I think luckily with a good family structure and people who supported me to say like, okay, well, what's within your control? Well, the guy happens to just be a better player than you. He gives the team a better chance to win. So that is what he controls. What can you do? Well, I can get back to work. Like I can try my best to be strong physically and mentally, look for a different opportunity, and then make an impact on a different team. And so that's what happened in that case. The same is true now. I mean, it's funny. We were I have a 9-year-old daughter who plays soccer, and parents complain about the refs constantly. I mean, constantly. Our girls play up, so they're playing against bigger physical girls, so they get beat up quite a bit, and the refs don't always call it because soccer is apparently far more physical than I realize because I'm not a soccer guy. And I never, ever, ever have ever said or raised my voice at a game, and certainly would never yell at a referee, ever. And so some of the parents like actually pulled us aside and say, why don't you ever say anything? And I said, because it's good that that they have bad referees. It's good that they miss calls. These girls need to learn that that's how life is. You're going to have bad referees. You're not going to get the calls, and you got to get up and keep going. And I think some of the parents think I'm weird when I said it, but I'm like, I actually like when we have games with bad referees for our 9-year-old girls soccer team. Like, why are we yelling at them? It's good for them to have to go through that because that's life. Like, they're going to grow up and they're going to have a bad boss. They're going to have bad colleagues. They're going to have something unfair will happen at work that makes absolutely no sense. But that's life. Like, that's a guarantee to happen over and over. And so the only thing that you can control is how you respond to those situations. We know for a fact that they're going to happen. So I want my daughters going through those situations. I want them to have to deal with it. When I sit down with Charlie after the game and said, hey, like, you're going to get beat up and they're not going to call a foul. What are you going to do? Just complain and whine and cry? Like, how is that going to help you? That's not helpful at all. Like, you got to get back up and get after it. Like, that's the only thing within your control. So I think, like, whether it's working with your team at work, and I know how Brooks' practices are, like, they're brutal on those guys. There's no out of bounds. They're not calling fouls. Like, they're hammering these dudes because they're letting them know, like, if you want to play for us, like, you got to be tough. Like, that's one of our core values. And so why not, like, put our teams in positions to have to respond to really challenging situations so that when the next piece of adversity comes, we're better suited to handle it. And so whether it's being a dad or coaching a team or leading a team at work, like, I think we regularly need to put our people in really tough situations to prepare them to deal with the next adverse situation and the next one and the next one. That's good. Like, that helps prepare us to be in a much better situation than just trying to, like, have perfect referees all the time or have the situation be snowplowed for them. Like, that's not our job as leaders to be doing that, whether it's for our kids or for the people that we're leading.
Hey, one follow-up before you dive in, Coach, and I think we don't want to belabor the point, certainly Ryan's story, with Ben Roethlisberger, but I think this is powerful because it can also relate to the book, this idea of comparison that you talk about. And in the social media age, this is something that we discuss a lot, but how important was that for you too, Ryan? And did your experience, with the Ben Roethlisberger situation or other situations throughout your career influence your writing about, the poison of comparison?
Well, I mean, 18, 19 years old, I was obviously comparing myself to him like every second of every day. We had class together, we were in a weight room together, film room together, practice field together, games together. I actively rooted really hard for him to fail at everything that he did because I wanted the job, So, like, I think most backup quarterbacks probably feel that way. If they say they're, like, actually rooting for the starter, I question them because, like, we all want to play. And so that though, the funny thing is, I still had some of that mentality when I went into the professional world where like I would actively root against my teammates because I wanted to beat them. But in the real world, like the world is not zero sum. You don't have to root against people. There's plenty for all of us. The world of being a quarterback is just so different than the regular world because only one guy gets to play. But in the business world, in the real world, that's not the case. Like it actually helps the chances for me to win increase if the people around me win. And so I should be trying to help them do better. But it took some time, I would say years, for me to fully get out of that zero sum world to realize, man, there is plenty for all of us to go around. But that's because I was conditioned as I happened to play a position that a lot of people want to play and only one guy gets to do it. And so there's good things of playing that position, of teaching you how to be a leader, and all the people's eyes are on you. All that, like, there's good stuff, but there's also things that you almost have to unlearn to get out of because you're comparing yourself so much to the other quarterbacks because only one of you gets to go out there and do it.
Yeah, well, comparing yourself to a multiple time Super Bowl champion and Hall of Fame quarterback, I mean that is, that's challenging, and that's certainly something that I think, as young leaders too, we see people on social media, we see these perfect lives, we see these the top of the industry leaders, and maybe this is a great question for Brooke as well because you work with young kids. That the comparison, how much of an issue is that, and how do we avoid that poison?
It's a huge issue. I mean, with social media, it's a battle for likes. It's a battle for clothes, shoes. I mean, you name it. There's a comparison going on. And we just try to talk to our guys and try to help them understand who they are and define success on their terms. We define success on our terms as a team, as a way to model that for our guys. Like we never talk about our record. We never talk about winning the next game. I mean, the things you can control is the process. And so we try to really dive into and commit ourselves to the process, the things that are controllable for us. And then once they have some values set, then it's easier to reflect on those as being your barometer for success or failure rather than the outcome of a certain game.
Brooke, I'll start with you, and Ryan, a similar question for this one. I kid leaders that you're the CPS, the chief problem solver, and you also, I think, excellent leaders are the CST, the chief storytellers. So I'm curious, I'll start with you, Brooke, and Brooke, in your situation as a basketball coach, tell us a story of a major problem and how you overcame it. And Ryan would be very similar, other than I just would be curious on a major problem you faced in one of your business endeavors and how you overcame it. So, Brooke, starting with you with your coaching.
A major problem. Oh Lord, there's been a lot of them. Let's see. Um, I'll tell the story about Max Knauer, who was on our state championship team, was a really good player as a junior or as a senior, I'm sorry, and had a good summer heading into his senior year. We had a really good team coming back. We were young. We had a good group of sophomores that were going to play some. Max worked his butt off, was incredible the whole year. Got up to the point of playing, like never missed anything in the preseason. Got up to the point of playing, and was basically just not going to get to play as kind of our eighth man in lieu of a sophomore that was going to get that kind of minimal time. But I felt it was important time for a sophomore to get. We're a senior. I didn't think they were close enough where I thought the time should go to the sophomore. So Max was a issue for a little bit for us. I mean, he was good. Would have played on a lot of teams, but just wasn't able to play on that team. And so he was on our scout team, and throughout most of the season, he was okay, never really great. Kept talking to him about his role and kept talking to him about what he needed to do. And then we did a thing. Before the tournament, we do this thing called Tournament Lent, where everybody gives up something for the team, like something for the tournament. What are you going to give up, sacrifice for the team over the next few weeks or however long we go in the tournament? And so I think a lot of times within teams, you just have to keep giving people the opportunity to do the right thing. I don't think forcing it is like you're putting a cap on your potential when you're forcing. I think you got to keep giving guys the opportunity to choose what's right. And so we had done several different activities, but this tournament Lent, went around and guys gave up sugar and guys gave up candy and guys gave up video games and some guys took social media off their phones and
Hmm.
well, it gets to Max, and Max pulls out his student ID, and we're putting them all in a trash can. And as they told what they were giving up, he pulls out a student ID and he just says, I'm giving up my personal identity for the identity of the team. Like now, my success is just the success of the team, or my failure is the failure of the team. Like I'm all in for this team. And he threw it in. And from that point on, he was phenomenal. I mean, he was the leader of our scout team. We played the state player of the year in the state semifinals and beat him by 20. And Max was a better version of the player of the year than that week of practice than that kid was in the game. Like our guys were like, this kid's not even very good. And like, because Max had been so good the week leading up to that. So um that's the story. Max Knauer, one of my guys. He was a member of our state championship team and really represents for us like what it really means to be about like the group and sacrifice and giving of yourself for the bigger whole.
Wow, thanks for sharing. That's a beautiful story. Ryan?
Yeah, that is awesome. It's so cool to hear about like teams coming together. I actually, one of the stories I thought of was just a huge mistake that I made when I was working as a sales manager at a company called LexisNexis. One of the things that happens is that every once in a while, if somebody leaves or gets promoted, then their territory becomes open, and usually there's some jockeying for territories because you want to like get a better opportunity or a better sales territory. Anyway, I had two people going for this open territory. One, a pretty experienced guy, and two, a more inexperienced woman on my team. And they both came to me and kind of presented their case why they should get it. And I listened to them, and then I chose the guy. And I pulled in my office and I told him and said, "Hey, go kill it for us. Let's go crush the number, whatever." And I was so cowardly at the time. This was very earlier in my career that I didn't want to like give the bad news to the woman who I did not give the territory, and I just thought, well, she'll kind of figure out that she didn't get it because the other guy got it. And I didn't say anything. I didn't call a one-on-one with her. I didn't have a meeting with her, and I just kind of said like, "Oh, it'll just go away." and I remember it was an awesome lesson because I met with a mentor a few weeks after this happened because the woman eventually came into my office and told me like she was pretty emotional and upset with me and even like called me some names, and I kind of deserved all of them because she's like, "You didn't even tell me why," and I thought I presented a good case, and I remember thinking like, yeah, you're right. I should have been upfront. I should have been direct. I should have been proactive in my communication. And I met with my mentor, one of my mentors afterwards, and he said, "Hey, dude, bad news doesn't get better with age." And I've never forgotten that statement ever. So if you have bad news to give to somebody, don't wait. Like I should have brought her in first and said, "Hey, here's why I gave him the territory, not you. We're moving forward. Let's go." As opposed to like literally hoping this bad news would just magically disappear and I wouldn't have to deal with it. And I could blame, my immaturity or whatever, but it was really just being a coward at the time. And so, but those are like the stories of growing up. Those are the stories of how we get better. And I've never forgotten the idea that bad news doesn't get better with age. And so whether it's in my personal life or professional life, if I have to deliver bad news to somebody, it's like do it as quickly as humanly possible because it
Right.
never, ever, ever, ever gets better if you just try to let it sit like, oh, maybe it'll go away. It never goes away, ever.
Right.
And I learned that early on, like the real hard way because I messed it up myself. So that's a story that like I've never forgotten. And it's a phrase that's like stuck in my mind. Bad news doesn't get better with age.
And this is such a valuable advice, because I have seen when I'm running my nonprofit, there are individuals who would not give me the bad news. And
Yep.
when they're stalling it, more problems just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I would say that you could have just told me that earlier and we could have tackled it much better. So this is, and so many people do that, both matured and immatured individuals. So thank you so much for sharing that advice. My last question to you all is, as Brooke was mentioning, like we often we need to be secured, and when we want to be secured, a value system is so important. But I have, when I'm asking people about their values, still I see people struggle to identify what are their core values. So some techniques from both of you, like how did you find your own values? Like, these are my core values. How do you explore that? And then we can stick to it when we are moving forward with our life.
I mean, our go-to is asking you people that you admire. I think the people that you admire send a very strong signal to what's important to you. Just like there's reasons you don't like someone, usually they violate the values that you hold. I think the reason you admire someone is because they share the values that you either hold or aspire to hold. And so by looking at those people and writing down what their behaviors are, what their habits are, the things that they do, I think it gives you a very good insight into what you value and what you think is important. I would say that, but I think the problem isn't identifying the values for most people. I think we have a pretty good idea, and really they're just kind of words. Like it
Mhm.
doesn't matter if I say I want to be honest or I want to have integrity. Okay, whichever one you want to have. Like, okay, right? I want to be diligent or I want to be hardworking, whatever. I think the difference for people that are able to live them intentionally is attaching behaviors to them. And I think that is unique, and most people don't ever make that jump and make that step. When, when I know that tough for me is positive body language, now I have a very clear picture of how I need to show up, right? Very clear to be tough. I know exactly what that looks like. And so I think attaching that to whatever value, a lot of people wouldn't say tough is positive body language, right? Like it could be something else, but that's how I define it. And so that leads me to my purpose, and it makes it very personal to me. So that's my 2 cents on it. I think the people that you admire, and then getting to your behaviors quickly.
True.
Well, as we
Right.
wrap up here on our time, I do want to, first of all, thank both of you so much for your time and insight today. We've only scratched the surface of what you've covered in the book. So we want to encourage everyone to go grab this book up on Amazon. Link down in the show notes. Patrick Lencioni called this book transformational. Buzz Williams, who's a big time college basketball coach, called it a beacon of light. Finally, Brooke and Ryan, let's start with Ryan. Tell us a little bit about what the everyday average listener, reader can get from this book, what they can expect.
Well, I mean, I think we clearly define the difference between living by your outer scoreboard or the inner one. We give, I think, a pretty clear blueprint of how to define your core values and the critical behaviors to match, and and for you to create your own personal definition of what success is for you, not society's, and then a lot of exercises to how to define that, maintain it, and live it out each day. So I think it's highly practical, meaning that there's actions to take if you're willing to do the work. We definitely don't think it's easy, and there's no date of arrival. So it's an ongoing pursuit, and it's a lot. I think it's harder to live that way, but it's much more meaningful, and you have a chance to live out your purpose. And I think all of our purposes have something to do with impacting other people. And so if you care to do that, then our book's for you. If you don't care to really know yourself, if you don't care to define success on your own terms, if you don't care to make an impact, a positive dent in the world, then you probably shouldn't read our book. But if you do care to do those things, then I think our book could be helpful.
I don't have much to add to that. Move people towards excellence. I think that's what we want, and hopefully the book, inspires people to want to go that direction.
Coaches, one final question, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I've been blessed to be able to speak around the country on leadership. And, one of the questions I often get from leaders is, Coach, you got to the top. How do you stay at the top? Because I kind of, John Wooden was kind of my, mentor from afar. And what a lot of people didn't know is it took him 16 years at UCLA before they won a national championship. And then he went on a pretty good run after that, winning 10 in the last 12 years. And mine, not quite to certainly that degree, but it took me 19 years to win our first championship. And then we made the finals 8 times in my last 11 years and won six. So I have some ideas on what I tell leaders. I'm curious. I'll start with you, Ryan, then Brooke. Because you both have reached the pinnacle. Brooke winning a state championship, Ryan, doing really well with your business and your podcast. So, what advice would you give leaders that have reached a pinnacle in their career so they can stay at a high level?
Oh man. I mean, I think we always have to be pushing our standards, and that starts with us. And so the expectations rise, our standards rise, and then again, if you're not born with like the talent of a Jay-Z or somebody like that, then I think you gotta, and even him though is still grinding every day. I think you have to get after it. Consistency is one of the least sexy words that there is. It's not very fun as an answer. People want to hack. I don't think consistency and the ability and willingness to show up and do the work, regardless of how you feel, the good days, the not so good days, like getting up and getting after it each day and then watch compounding take effect. I would say has probably been one of the keys for the stuff that I'm trying to do is just consistently willing to get up and get after it. That's why it's one of my 4 core values is just I gotta show up and try to get after it because that can make up for deficiencies in other areas or maybe lesser talent is if you're willing to kind of get up and get after it. And when I look at the people who have sustained excellence over time, that seems to be something they have in common too.
Right. Brooke?
My first question, my first response is who's top? Like, it's an external question.
Mhm.
By saying we've reached the summit, we've reached the top. That's the top from the perspective outside of us. Like you have no idea if that's the top that I think that's success to me. So I would just say continue to continue to define success on your terms, regardless of how it's viewed by others. It doesn't matter if you think I'm successful or if you think I'm a failure. It's my definition of success that I'm operating by. So by just sticking with that and staying true to that, I think it all takes care of itself.
It's a great point. Well, I just very grateful to have both of you, and we'd love to continue, staying in touch. You guys are really making a positive impact on the world, and we really appreciate your time and your insights today.
We admire it. We really admire it. And the link is down in the show notes too. If you want more of Ryan and Coach Cupps, grab that book down in the show notes. Thank you, Brooke. Thank you, Ryan, for your time today.
Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you. Thanks for having us.